Hi, good morning everyone. Let's get started with the next topic for this training session, which is on database. So in this topic, what I'll be doing is I'll be covering the different aspects of database, especially right from the monitoring to the creation of database to the different architectural component within the database. So the database that I'm going to use is going to be the Oracle database. So in this particular slide here, you can see I'm giving an overview of different processes within an Oracle database system. You can see there is a Oracle listener process is there. The listener process, basically it is just a listener. It just listens and it just redirects or connects the incoming request to the database. So that is the objective of listener work process. Then here you can see on the right side you have different shared processes, which is dbwr, lgwr, arc, ckpt, ppmon, pmon, smon, and okay, so basically these are the dbwr is, then we have log writer, archiving, checkpoint, pmon, smon. So these are the key work processes. Okay, then here you can see this is about the memory area, where you have the SGAs, the shared global area, which is basically it's a configurable parameter, and this can be configured within the init sit.ora file. Then here below you can see there is a SQL shared area, which is the shared pool, and you have the raw cache there. Then at the bottom in this particular memory area you have the redo log buffer. Okay, if we go down, what you are seeing is the database files, basically the at the file level what is there. So here you can see you have the profiles, which is basically storing the profile information. Then you have control files, you have data files where all the data is kept. Then you have online redo logs, you have offline redo log files. So these are basically the different components in terms of the different processes, in terms of memory, in terms of files. So that's all the Oracle database comprises of. So what we have seen is you have the Oracle. So whenever an Oracle database instance is created or it is started, several processes are created. Basically you have the dedicated shared processes, you have the shared processes. Okay, then database data is stored in the blocks of a specific size. It could be 8K, 16K, 32K, depending on how big block size you need it. Okay, then we have seen that modifications to database data are logged in the online redo log files. So this process ensures data security. To ensure fail-safe database operations without using additional operating system utilities, the control files and online redo log files of the database should be mirrored. Okay, so why this mirroring is required? We just saw that basically just to make sure that in case if there is any failure of one of the disk, we have the other disk where we have the information about the control files and the online redo log files, because that is going to be useful during recovery. Okay, then we saw each R3 process, basically it connects to the database as a user called SAP R3, or now it is called SAP SR3 users, which is basically a configuration parameter. While installing a database, you can define which user you want to use, or while doing an SAP installation you can define what is going to be the schema name. Okay, so that is about the different processes and file systems available. Okay, then let's go to the next slide, where basically I am talking about the different operating system and database users which is required. So you can see that at the top you have the Unix based users. Basically you have the username, that is Aura SID. Say for example your SID, that is the system identification number, is say C11. So your user will be Aura C11. Then the OS group for that will be DBA, and it is OPER as well. So that user has to be part of these two groups. It's basically an internal database user and which should have full database administration privileges. Then you have another user which is an SAP user, which is a SID ADM. Say for example C11 is your SID, then it becomes C11 ADM as the user. Okay, then we have OPS dollar SID ADM. Basically it is used for connecting to the database. Okay, so these are the users in the Unix environment. Let's come to the Windows environment. So Windows environment, at the middle you can see where we have SID ADM user. Basically it should be part of Aura SID DBA group. Then you have SAP services SID. Basically it should be part of Aura SID underscore OPER. And the internal user which is required is OPS dollar SAP service SID. So these are basically the different users at OS level we need it. So privilege is required. Basically it's everything is stored in init sid.ora file, and just to make sure that people from remote or basically from SAP system we can connect to this, we use something called OS underscore auth ent underscore prefix, that is OPS dollar, that is listed here. Okay, let's go to the password for this particular say password for the SAP R3 or SAP SR3 user. Here you can see that we have defined the mechanism called remote OS authentication to true. Okay, when we define this particular OS authentication to true, what happens is that as a step 1 we connect as user OPS dollar to the Oracle database. So you can see that on this side, on the left side, from an SAP system, or it could be in central instance, it could be a database instance, we are connecting to the database server, and in this process of connection, as a step 1 we are connecting as user OPS dollar. So using OPS dollar we connect to the database, and we'll go to the table called SAP user table, and from the SAP user table we get the password, and then we'll connect as user SAP SR3 or SAP R3 depending on the schema name that you have. So this is basically a 3-step process that we just saw. Okay, so let's go to the next topic in this. So we have seen different users, we have seen how the SAP SR3 password is working. In this slide basically I am showing about the listener processes, that is how the listener is interacting and what the listener we need to define, and which are the different key files. Here you can see the tnsnames.ora file, you have the SQL net.ora, you have listener.ora file. So these are the 3 key files that is available. You can see at the left on the, especially say on the right side as well, on the left side. So basically these are the different files which should be present in the client side as well as on the server side. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, which is basically it's talking about the database admin tools. So basically you require these tools to manage the database. So from SAP mainly you use these tools like ST04, tools like DB02, DB24. You have BR tools, you have RZ20. So these are basically the tools which is used. Okay, so let's go through them in detail. Okay, so next thing is let's go into the ST04. So in ST04 we'll be going through them in details while connecting to the live system. I'll show you how to read this particular reports, and here you can see the pictorial view of the different key parameters, key things in ST04. They are pretty important from the performance point of view. You can see one thing is about the Oracle data buffer quality. So this is pretty important. Basically it is telling that how much data the Oracle is going to the disk to get it. So anything below 95-96% is considered to be the bad quality. So that is about the data buffer. Then you have the shared pool. Okay, then at the bottom you have the user call statistics. Okay, then on the right side you have the log buffer, that is the redo log buffer. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, which is on space monitoring. So space monitoring is one key activity, which is one of the most important activity as well. Basically here you keep track of the table space utilization, you keep track of the different performance related activities, you keep track of the response times. Okay, so you keep track of the objects at tables and the index levels. Okay, so DB02, it's one of the very important transactions, especially for the DBAs or the SAP people. Okay, so let's go to the next T code, which is DB24. Okay, DB24, it's pretty important from the operations point of view, because here you can see things like whether which process is running, whether what type of activity which is completed, what is running. Okay, so it's very important, and you can come back and see how many have failed, how many is still running. Okay, so that is about the DB24. Let's go to the next one, which is RZ20. RZ20 is quite important from the monitoring, that is the CCMS point of view. Here you can define the different monitoring templates. You can monitor, say, table spaces, you can monitor performance, you can monitor backups, you can monitor the database connections, you can monitor SQL statements, you can monitor, say, system logs, and the database host operating system as well can be monitored from this. So you can see it's pretty important from the monitoring perspective to get a feel of the health of the database. So for the DBA, for an SAP basis guy, this is pretty important, and you need to have a full control of how your system is behaving. Okay, so that is about the RZ20. Let's go in detail about this particular tool. Okay, so here we are talking about the details of the BR tool. Okay, so BR tool, in BR tool what we are covering is, it's pretty important tool, and we'll be seeing in the demo, live demo as well, that what are the options which is available. Basically what you can do is you can do in stop start of database, you can manage your space, you can take a backup, you can perform a recovery, you can view the log file. So those are the key things which can be done from here. Okay, so let's go to the next activity, which is about the starting and stopping of the databases. Okay, so far what we have seen is we have seen about the architecture, we have seen about the monitoring components. Now let's get into the starting and stopping of the databases. That is, what are the things which we need to keep note of, what are the things which we need to keep track of. Okay, so let's go to the next page, where we are seeing the different, on the extreme left side you can see the different ways the database can be started. So basically you have, first step is the no mount, that is the database is not in a mounted stage. Second is database is starting in the mount stage. Okay, the third is the open state, database is open for transactions. So these are the three different stages depending on the critical function that you are going to perform. So any maintenance activities, basically any critical maintenance activities, we just make sure that the database is not open. So it could be either in a no mount or it could be in a mount stage. Okay, next thing is in the center you can see the different types of files that is available. You have the profiles, you have the control files, you have the data files, you have the online redo log files, you have the offline redo log files. Okay, on the extreme right side you can see the different Oracle processes which are there. In the Oracle processes you have the DBWR, the LGWR, the archiving process, the checkpoint, the PMON, the SMON, and you have the Oracle listener process. Below that you have the memory area, which is you have the SGA, that is shared global area. You have the database buffer pool, you have shared pool, you have redo log buffer. So basically this is talking about the different processes, different files. Okay, so let's go to the next slide where I'm explaining all of this, basically the different types of shutdown and the restarts. Okay, so when an Oracle database is started, basically it goes in 3 phases, and you can independently do it, or you can just, whenever you do a normal start also, these are the 3 phases which it goes through. Okay, so no mount phase. In no mount phase, what happens is that the database instance is built up. Okay, operating system resources are allocated using the configuration information stored in the profile, that is initsid.ora file. Okay, in the next phase, which is the mount phase, the control files of the database are evaluated and the system reads the information about the file structure of the database. It finds out the data files and the logs are not yet opened yet. And in the open phase, what happens is all files in the database system are opened. If required, an instance recovery is performed immediately after opening the database. Pending database transactions are ended. So these are the 3 key most important phases in the starting of a database. Okay, next thing, let's get into the shutdown of the database. So shutdown could be, there are 3 activities, which is a shutdown normal. Basically no new database logons are possible. After all database users have logged off, the database is closed systematically. So this is a normal shutdown process, that is, it waits for all the transactions to close systematically. And once all the files are closed, the database is dismounted. Okay, and the instance is shut down. The database is consistent after shutdown. So next way of shutdown is shutdown immediate, which basically only the current commands are executed. PMON ends all sessions and performs a rollback of the open transactions. Database is then closed systematically and the database is consistent after shutdown. Okay, the next phase is about the database abort. This is basically an emergency database shutdown. Users are not logged off and a rollback of the open transaction is not performed, and the database, in this case, because we are not doing a normal log off for users, we are not rolling back the transactions, this makes the database in inconsistent phase after shutdown. An instance recovery is automatically performed at the beginning of the next database startup. So basically these are the 3 key startup and shutdown phases which is there. Okay, so let's get into the next one. In the next slide, what you're seeing is the different files and the processes and how they are interacting with the memory and the disk. Okay, so basically an Oracle database system has 3 processes that we saw, that writes information from the SGA to the appropriate files. Okay, then during a checkpoint, the DBWR, basically it's a database writer, asynchronously writes the changed block from the SGA to the database file. So that is first step. To speed up the writing of checkpoints, the checkpoint process is started. Then here you can see it's a LGWR. Basically the log writer synchronously writes the changed log from the SGA redo log buffer to the currently active online redo log file. So in a production system, the database must always run in an archive mode and have the archiver process, that is the ARCH process, okay, started. Okay, so then what happens is that so basically we have seen what happens when any transaction happens, what happens in the archive log, and which are the parameters which is required just to make sure that the archiving is enabled. Okay, once the offline redo log file has been successfully created, the corresponding online redo log file is released to be overwritten with new log information. Okay, so this is about the different processes which takes place during a read write operations. Okay, now let's get into the next thing is about the storage management aspect. Basically the different things like the data files, the table spaces, the segments, the extent, the data blocks, and how they are interrelated. So that's what we will be covering in this particular section. So database, basically here you can see the key components. Okay, you have the data files, you have the table spaces, you have segments. Okay, so what happens is that a database is divided into logical storage unit called table spaces, and table spaces are divided into logical unit of storage called segments, that is tables and indexes. Segments, they are further divided into extents. Okay, and this could be of contiguous data blocks, and the data blocks may vary from say 8 or 16 or 32 depending on your database and depending on the read write operations that you want to perform. Okay, the next is about the table space in an Oracle database consists of one or more physical data files. Okay, so you have more than one, or basically there are multiple data files which is there on different disks. A data file can be associated with only one table space. You can increase a table space basically by increasing the size of a data file, or you can add a data file to a table space. Okay, next is about the storage parameter. Basically there are few things like you have an initial extent, you have a next extent, and you have a max extent. Allows you to manage space allocated to a table. Okay, for performance reasons, operating system block size should be the same as the Oracle database block size. Okay, so that is about the storage aspects of it. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, this is about the naming conventions. Okay, in this slide what you are seeing is you are seeing basically the table spaces names and the naming convention for them. So basically you have a prefix which is PSAP, you have an abbreviation which is table space name, and you have an extension that is D or I depending on whether it is a data file or it is an index file. Okay, so these are pretty important because you should know some key things. Basically one is the temp, so temp table space, role table space, and you have other table spaces depending on the requirement. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Okay, here we are talking about the directory structure in R3. So directory structure, basically this is just an idea. Basically I just want to give you guys that, so which are the key directories which is present in an Oracle database. So you have the DBS, that is database directory. You have bin folder where you have all your Oracle executables, and the type of files which is present here is say something like initsid.ora, initsid.dba, initsid.sap. Okay, take note that initsid.sap file is basically for storing the SAP related configuration, especially it is used by the BR tools. Then you have SAP trace, basically the Oracle alert file or the user trace is here. Then you have SAP data 1, 2, 3, 4 depending on the data, actual data. Then you have something called the SAP backup directory, which is basically used by the BR backup, BR restore logs. You have the SAP arc for the BR archive logs. Okay, then you have the SAP check, basically just for checking and analyzing. Then you have a reorg folder, you have org logs, basically these are the online redo log files. Okay, here you can see there are 2 online redo log files, there are 2 online redo log mirror files as well, so basically it's mirrored. Okay, so that is about the directory structure. Okay, let's get into the next thing is about it's basically talking about the directories and the file names. Let's get into the next one, which is about the Oracle directories and the environment variables. So basically the key environment variable, which is Oracle underscore home. This is one of the most important variable which says where the Oracle home is located. And the key files within the Oracle home is the DBS folder, you have the bin folder, you have network admin folder. Network admin folder, why it is key, because you have your all the TNS names.ora, listener.ora, and so basically the key files are there in this particular Oracle underscore home variable. Okay, then you can see that SAP data underscore home, you have rest of the key directory structures. Okay, so let's get into the next thing, which is about basically it is talking about the database roles and users. So database roles, you can see at the top there are 3 very important roles, which is sysdba role. Basically this role, if you assign to a user, he can perform any database administration transactions, so he has all the privileges. Then you have sysoper role, which basically if you assign this role to a user, he can perform the database administration work such as startup, shutdown, backup, basically an operator role. Then you have SAP DBA, which is basically the critical performance. Basically you can analyze, you can administrate. So these are about the roles. Then the database users, you have the 3 key users, which is sys user, you have system user, you have SAP SR3 user. Okay, then at the bottom you can see that connect internal is, you might have seen the command that whenever we start, or we can just type the command as connect /sysdba, so it's you are connecting as an internal user. Okay, so let's get into the next slide, which is about the listener. Listener is pretty important because if the listener is not running, you won't be able to connect to the database. So how do you check whether the listener is running? So basically just type listener CTL and type status. It will show you the status of the listener. And here you can see that if you just type listener CTL help, it will show you the different options which can be given with listener CTL. Okay, then below you can see when this, if you just give a status, it will say which version and whether it is running or not. Okay, all that information. Alright, so let's get into the next slide, which is basically talking about the alert monitoring tree. We have just seen this particular transaction under CCMS. Okay, so here we are using the database. You can see that the key is monitor identification is database. So in this you can see the monitoring object is, you have buffer, you have optimizer, things like that. Okay, so that is about the monitoring tree. Okay, so that's what actually I wanted to cover in this particular training session. Thanks for joining and have a nice day, and bye bye.